Detroit at 2 in the morning is not a place for the faint of heart. The streets stretch out like dark veins through a sleeping giant, illuminated only by the flickering yellow glow of streetlights that seem to barely hold back the shadows. Abandoned buildings stand like silent witnesses to decades of stories untold, their broken windows reflecting nothing but emptiness. The air is thick with that particular kind of silence that comes just before something happens, a silence that makes your heart beat a little faster without knowing why. This is where our story begins, on a night that would change one Uber driver's life forever. The notification came through at exactly 2:13 in the morning, a pickup request from an address on the east side, a neighborhood most drivers instinctively decline. But bills don't pay themselves, and the rent was already 3 days overdue. The driver, a 34-year-old man trying to make ends meet after losing his factory job, accepted the ride without hesitation. As he drove through the empty streets, his headlights cutting through the mist that had settled over the asphalt, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about tonight. The city felt heavier somehow, like it was holding its breath. When he arrived at the pickup location, a figure emerged from the darkness of an alley between two boarded-up buildings. The man was tall, wearing a dark hoodie that obscured most of his face, and he moved with the deliberate slowness of someone carrying an invisible weight. As he opened the back door and slid into the seat, the interior light briefly illuminated his face. His eyes were wide, darting, the kind of eyes that have seen too much. He didn't say hello, didn't acknowledge the driver's greeting. He just sat there, breathing heavily, his hands gripping his knees. Then came the words that turned the driver's blood to ice. The passenger leaned forward slightly, his voice barely above a whisper, and said, "Just so you know, I'm armed." The air in the car seemed to evaporate instantly. The driver's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. His mind raced through 1,000 scenarios, each one worse than the last. Was this a robbery? A carjacking? Should he run? Should he try to talk his way out? But something in the passenger's voice stopped him from panicking completely. It wasn't threatening. It was scared. The GPS showed the destination was 12 minutes away, across town to a residential area near the river. 12 minutes that suddenly felt like 12 hours. The driver started driving, keeping his eyes on the road but hyper-aware of every movement behind him. The passenger remained silent, staring out the window at the passing darkness. Every red light felt like an eternity. Every empty intersection felt like a potential trap. The driver's heart hammered against his ribs so hard he was certain the passenger could hear it. 5 minutes into the ride, the driver noticed something that didn't fit the image of a dangerous criminal. The passenger's hands were shaking, not with aggression or anticipation, but with genuine fear. His reflection in the rearview mirror showed a face etched with exhaustion and something deeper, something that looked like desperation. Sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the cool night air. His breathing was irregular, catching in his throat every few seconds. This wasn't the demeanor of someone planning violence. This was someone running from it. At a stoplight near the old train station, the passenger suddenly spoke again. "Can you take me somewhere else?" His voice cracked slightly, revealing the terror he'd been trying to conceal. The driver's immediate thought was trap, but he forced himself to ask, "Where?" The passenger gave an address the driver recognized as a church on the west side, about 20 minutes in the opposite direction. "Please," the passenger added, and in that single word, the driver heard something that changed everything. He heard a human being asking for help. What would you do in this moment? Would you trust your instincts and keep driving? Or would fear make you stop and demand answers? The driver made a decision that surprised even himself. He changed the route. As they drove through the sleeping city, the passenger began to talk. His voice was quiet, almost confessional, as if speaking to a stranger in the darkness made it easier to release the words he'd been holding inside. He explained that he'd witnessed something he shouldn't have seen earlier that night, something involving people who wouldn't hesitate to silence him permanently. He'd grabbed his deceased father's old pistol from a drawer, something he'd never even fired, and ran. He didn't know where else to go except to Father Michael at the church, the only person he trusted. The pieces began to fall into place like a tragic puzzle. This wasn't a criminal threatening a driver. This was someone whose life had spiraled into nightmare territory in a single evening. Someone who'd made the choice to warn the driver about the weapon not as a threat, but as a courtesy, a way of saying, "I'm dangerous to be around right now, but not dangerous to you." The driver felt his fear transforming into something else entirely, something more complex. He began to see the passenger not as a threat, but as someone trapped in circumstances beyond their control, much like himself. As they approached the church, its white steeple barely visible against the dark sky, the passenger spoke one more time. "I'm sorry I scared you. I just didn't want you to think I was hiding anything. You didn't deserve to be pulled into this." The driver pulled up to the curb outside the church, where a light burned in one of the ground floor windows. The passenger opened the door, then hesitated. "Thank you for not abandoning me out there. Most people would have." Then he was gone, disappearing up the church steps and into the sanctuary beyond. The driver sat there in the silence that followed, his hands still gripping the steering wheel, his mind trying to process what had just happened. The empty streets of Detroit stretched out before him, exactly as they had been an hour ago. But somehow, everything felt different. He'd started that night thinking about rent and bills and the grinding reality of survival, and he'd ended it thinking about the invisible wars people fight every single day, the desperate choices they make when backed into corners, and the strange grace that can exist between strangers in the darkest hours. He never saw that passenger again. He never learned what happened after that night, whether the man found safety or whether his pursuers caught up with him. But the memory stayed, carved into his consciousness like a scar that never quite fades. Every time he drives through those same streets now, he thinks about that night, about the man in the hoodie who trusted a stranger with his life, about how close they both came to a completely different outcome. Thank you so much for staying with this story until this moment. Your time means everything to us, and we promise the most powerful part is still ahead. Sometimes, the most terrifying moments in life aren't the ones where danger is obvious and clear. They're the moments where everything hangs in a balance so delicate that a single wrong word, a single wrong choice, could tip everything into catastrophe. That Uber driver learned something profound that night in Detroit. Something about the nature of fear and trust and the strange bonds that can form between people who have no reason to trust each other except that they're both human beings trying to survive in a complicated world. He learned that carrying a weapon doesn't make someone a monster, and that sometimes the people who seem most dangerous are really just the most afraid. In the end, we all carry invisible burdens through our days and nights, all of us armed with our own forms of protection against a world that can feel overwhelmingly hostile. Some of us carry weapons. Some carry walls around our hearts. Some carry masks that hide who we really are. That passenger was just more honest about it than most, speaking his truth into the darkness of that car at 2 a.m, hoping that honesty might buy him a few more hours of life. And that driver, facing his own fears and his own instinct for survival, chose compassion over caution and changed both their lives in ways neither of them fully understood. So what would you have done? Would you have driven him to safety? Or would fear have made you stop and call the police? Have you ever been in a situation where you had to decide whether to trust a stranger who seemed dangerous? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you or made you think differently about the people we encounter in our daily lives, subscribe to Last Ride for more true stories that reveal the complexity of human nature. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another story. And don't leave yet. The next recommended video has a twist you absolutely need to see. Thank you for riding with us tonight.